When I first reviewed Apple's standard iPad model, I think I came to the same conclusion that most people did. This tablet is an insanely great value for people that did not need the extra bells and whistles of the more expensive iPad models. However, I was kinda wrong in hindsight because things have drastically changed since that initial review, and not for the worse, because after testing this iPad with the soon-to-be released version of iOS 26, I can confidently say that this iPad is not only a great budget tablet, but it now has the ability to replace an iPad Pro, and maybe even a MacBook. Now, some things haven't changed because Apple has not updated the hardware on the standard iPad model in any way. So everything I had to say initially about the hardware in my first review in March is exactly the same. And that is mainly that, yes, this is a budget iPad, but it's not a cheap iPad. It doesn't feel cheap. It still has an aluminum build and a similar design to the iPad Air. And that's what I really want to illustrate here, that this iPad has so many similarities to the iPad Air because it has the same speakers, the same front-facing camera with Apple's auto-cropping and reframing center stage feature, and the same 12-megapixel rear camera, which probably isn't great for taking pictures, but does work good as a document scanner. It also has the same Touch ID power button, the same volume button placement, and without talking about accessories, the only main difference is that this iPad does have a slower USB-C port, which honestly is pretty slow for data transfers, and the design is actually slightly thicker than the iPad Air, and even both the iPad Air and this iPad have an LCD display, although there are some noticeable drawbacks with the quality of the regular iPad's display. First of all, it's not a P3 wide color display, meaning that it doesn't have as wide of a color gamut as the iPad Air, which basically means that the colors aren't as accurate. There's more of a gradual shift in colors on the Air, but the bigger drawback to me is that the display is not laminated directly to the glass, and this iPad also lacks the anti-reflective display coating, which can make glares from light sources a lot more noticeable, which is why I always put on a paper-like screen protector to give this iPad a much-needed upgrade, because the paper-like not only protects the iPad's display, but it's also coated with nano dot technology, which adds a lot of tiny microbeads across the screen protector that changes the iPad's glossy display to a matte finish, which now scatters light and reduces harsh glares and reduces the amount of smudges or fingerprints that gets on your iPad display. Those tiny nano dots also add another benefit that highlights one of the key features with this iPad: the ability to use an Apple Pencil, and when paired with the Paperlike, you actually get an experience that feels and sounds like writing on actual paper. This makes sketching, drawing, and even journaling feel so much more natural and, quite frankly, enjoyable over the standard slippery display. With other screen protectors, it feels like you're downgrading your iPad's display. The Paperlike is the only screen protector that feels like it's giving your iPad display an upgrade rather than a downgrade. So to upgrade your iPad's display, check out the Paperlike in the description below, and thank you to Paperlike for sponsoring this video. Now, the one other difference I do always have to mention with this standard iPad is with one of its accessories, and it's not necessarily a outwardly bad change, just different. That would be Apple's Magic Keyboard. For the iPad, it uses a different design with a kickstand rather than the floating Magic Keyboard design you see on the iPad Air and the iPad Pro. This keyboard case actually is pretty interesting and has some pros going for it, because it does feature the same great Magic Keys as the higher-end iPad, so the typing experience feels almost exactly the same, and it even features a full function key row as well as a pretty good-sized trackpad. The back kickstand case is also separate from the keyboard, so you can detach the keyboard but still prop up your iPad to watch a video. This is great if you're flying economy and can't afford first class. Listen, I'm not flying first class. Do not believe the rumors. I'm an economy kind of guy. Premium economy, but you know, it's still economy. It's a little less elegant than the other keyboard, sure, and yeah, it is a little more flimsy, but overall, still a great accessory if you're planning to use your iPad as a laptop alternative. And that's where iOS 26 comes in, because this has transformed the iPad into a crazy good computer. You see, at the end of the day, it wasn't really the hardware of the basic iPad that held it back. It was always Apple artificially limiting the software, because Apple used to have a separate, more powerful multitasking mode for the iPads with the M series chips with their Stage Manager feature, and that never came to the iPads with the A series chip. And yes, this iPad uses an A16 chip with 6 GB of memory. It is an iPhone chip, but iOS 26 gives it not only iPad-like capabilities, but full-on Mac capabilities, because this iPad is no longer limited to just split-screen multitasking, and it also doesn't get the Stage Manager mode. It gets something much better: full windowed support. So now you can open multiple windows on this iPad. You can move them around the screen freely, you can have them overlap, and you just get a windowing system that is very Mac-like. In fact, each window even has its own stoplight Mac controls, with a red button to close the window, a yellow button to minimize the window, and a green button to maximize the window, as well as macOS style tiling options that just make moving and opening windows so much easier than the old system used to be. And as I was using this, I was wondering, what's the catch here? There's no way Apple implemented the same system on their basic level iPad as they did on their more expensive iPads, right? And I thought there had to be some sort of limitation here. Like maybe the A16 would have a limit to the amount of windows it could open compared to the other iPads. Like maybe it could only have 4 open at once. But as I've been testing this in between the beta versions of iPadOS 26, it doesn't really seem like there's an artificial limit in the number of windows you can have open. And the even better news is that there doesn't seem to be a major difference in performance, even with a lot of windows open, between this budget level iPad and the more expensive iPads. The A16 iPad, this $350 iPad, still runs smooth, and it's able to have more windows open than the small 11-inch screen can even display. And the Mac-like controls don't stop there, because Apple also added a drop-down menu bar on every app, which is actually something I didn't even know I wanted on the iPad until Apple added it. Now, I can just go to the menu bar and find a lot of those commonly accessed tools or features. And every app gets access to these windowing modes, even apps before that didn't work with split screen, like the Settings app and Final Cut Pro. So the system feels really powerful and consistent, and doesn't require as many weird workarounds as it used to for power users. Even little things like being able to add a folder to the dock to quickly access files can make all the difference in how fast and fluid working on an iPad feels. The best way I can illustrate how powerful this iPad is at times I kind of forget I'm working on Apple's lowest end iPad. And in a lot of ways, there's times where I forget that I'm working on an iPad entirely, because hooked up to a keyboard case, this feels so similar to macOS, and I mean that in the best way possible. In fact, in terms of limitations between this $350 iPad and Apple's $1,000 iPad Pro, there really aren't any major ones, except one that I think most people probably won't utilize, but the iPads with the M series chip do have full external display support, while this iPad only has display mirroring. And yeah, some higher end games can't run on the A16 chip for the regular iPad. This iPad doesn't have Apple Intelligence if you cared about that. Oh, and I guess even though this iPad does support the Apple Pencil, it is the less elegant USB-C Apple Pencil, which doesn't magnetically charge and does lose out on some of the more advanced features like hover and pressure sensitivity. Still, my main takeaway from this video was to see, what do you give up by going for this budget level iPad? And with iPadOS 26, you give up less than ever before and gain access to a ton of new powerful features and a cool new software design, while still keeping all of the things that make the iPad a versatile and powerful device. And I can kind of see why in the past, Apple did not add these more advanced software features to previous iPad versions. It's not because the chip couldn't run it, it certainly can. It's because this almost makes the basic iPad too good to recommend buying the more expensive models. And yes, the more expensive models do feature nice hardware upgrades and more premium designs, nicer screens, and yes, they do have faster chips, but they now don't feature an exclusive software experience. And that really makes all the difference. So yes, this thing can replace an iPad Air. It can replace an iPad Pro. I mean, this thing is now capable enough to replace a MacBook for most people. And that is a crazy thing to say about a device that just costs $350. So if you're considering buying this iPad, I highly recommend it. This is without a doubt the best valued Apple product of all time, without question. It is the most powerful, the most capable, and it's priced at a price that almost doesn't make sense for how good it is. If you're in the market for an iPad and found this video helpful, consider using my link in the description below to buy one, and let me know, what do you think about this new, I mean, it's not new, it's just a software update with iPadOS 26. What do you think about iPadOS 26 on this very low-cost iPad? Does it make you consider getting one? As always, if you liked the video, make sure you give me a like. If you want to see more, make sure you're subscribed. And thank you again for watching.